Good afternoon. The first item of business is time for reflection, and our time for reflection leader today is Rabbi Eliran Shabo, Honorary Jewish Chaplain for the Scottish Universities.
Presiding Officer, members of the Scottish Parliament, thank you very much for the opportunity to address you today. 2 weeks ago, Jews worldwide celebrated Passover, commemorating the Exodus and the end of centuries of Israelite slavery in Egypt. The less familiar part comes the following day, the counting of 49 days of Omer until the next Jewish festival, Shavuot, the celebration of receiving the Torah, the Jewish law. While this tradition appears in the Torah as a commandment from God, Rabbi Nissim from Gironde, a Torah commentator from 14th century Spain, claimed that the Israelites started count spontaneously and anticipatingly. This counting is quite unique. Firstly, we count up, not down. Today, for instance, is the 14th day of counting. Second, we count with anticipation for law, for meaning and responsibility. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, the former chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, explained that when a nation of slaves received freedom, they may be physically free, but they are still not a free society. In his words, a free society requires the strength and the rule of law. There is such a thing as constitution of liberty. Hence, we need to grow and develop in preparation for the next step, for receiving responsibility and understanding the meaning of our lives. In these 50 days of counting, we prepare ourselves daily. We consider how to be better and how we can improve our deeds. Indeed, you may refer to these days as time for reflection. It is not coincidence that these days of counting come at the beginning of spring, a season of renewal marked by blossoming life and the promise of abundant harvest. Farmers anticipate the harvest, hoping that this season will be fruitful and profitable. There is a daily process of observation and growing in nature as in ourselves. The counting of the Omer teaches us to set a positive goal and prepare accordingly. But it also teaches us that the celebration of freedom is tied with the celebration of responsibility. And in past generations, when freedom was taken away from our ancestors, they remained free in their minds, as they already held the manifestation of it in their hearts. In conclusion, as we reflect the significance of counting the Omer and the journey from slavery to freedom, let us remember that true liberation is not merely the absence of chains, but the embrace of responsibility and the pursuit of meaning. May this season of growth and introspection inspire us all to cultivate a society founded on the principles of justice, restraint, and the Jewish law. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reverend. Thank you. The next item of business is consideration of business motion 13118 in the name of George Adam on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau on changes to the business programme. Any member who wishes to speak against the motion should press their request to speak button now. And I call on George Adam to move the motion.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And moved.
Thank you, Minister. And I call on Douglas Ross to speak to and move Amendment 13118.1 up to 5 minutes, Mr Ross.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Exactly a week ago, I stood here and asked the Scottish Government, now a minority in this Parliament, to work with others to seek just one thing: for us to stay behind by just 30 extra minutes last Tuesday to get an urgent statement from the Lord Advocate. SNP and Green members last week voted that down. I hope this week they will support it, because this is a genuine request to get an update from not just the head of the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service in Scotland, but a member of the Scottish Government Cabinet. We last heard from the Lord Advocate in January. She made a statement to Parliament and was questioned by MSPs. During that statement, she was clear that exonerating everyone, a mass exoneration of everyone convicted under the Horizon scandal was not, in her view, the correct course of action. We are now into May, and we still don't know if that is the current and still held view of the Lord Advocate, or if her opinion has changed. We now know that in just a matter of weeks, this Parliament will be asked on the 21st of May to debate and vote on stage 1 of the Scottish Horizon legislation here in Holyrood. The next day, on the 22nd of May, we will debate stage 2 as a committee of this entire Parliament. How can we go into that important legislative process without knowing the position of the most senior law officer in Scotland? Last week, when I raised this issue, George Adam, responding, said there is no clarity needed. The Scottish Government has repeatedly made clear its position that proposed legislation on the Horizon scandal, etc., etc. What is not clear is if the Lord Advocate agrees with the position of the Scottish Government. I don't think it's too much for this Parliament to ask for the Lord Advocate to come to this chamber to outline her position and answer questions about it. We know there are questions due this week at First Minister's Questions. Pauline McNeill has a question on this issue at First Minister's Questions. And I will give way to Pauline McNeill, but that shows how important it is across the parties that we get a response on this issue. And I'll give way to Pauline McNeill.
Pauline McNeill.
Thank you to Douglas Ross for giving way. The member will be aware there was a 5-year period in which the suspicions about Horizon systems were known, and also be aware that no victims were contacted that had previously been prosecuted. Does the member agree that, given the actions of Crown Office, who should have known that through the Second Sight report that there were system flaws, that the Crown Office should be fully accountable for those actions to this Parliament, and Labour are happy to support this amendment to the business motion today?
Douglas Ross.
I very much welcome that support from Pauline McNeill and the support we got from Labour and the Liberal Democrats last week. And I will be listening with interest to her question and the responses on Thursday. But is it really too much to ask for this Parliament to sit for an additional 30 minutes tonight? Indeed, I think we might even finish early this evening. Is 30 minutes too much to ask to allow sub-postmasters in our constituencies and regions across Scotland to hear from the Lord Advocate, to hear if she still does not believe that mass exoneration is the right approach, or if she thinks that is now the correct approach and has advised so for the legislation coming up in just a couple of weeks' time? I'm encouraged that the SNP want to work across the political spectrum. I was disappointed 7 days ago that they voted down this reasonable amendment to the business motion. I hope today they will reconsider. They will vote with other parties in this Parliament to hear from the Lord Advocate, to allow that scrutiny from Parliament, and importantly, to give the answers our sub-postmasters not only need, but absolutely deserve. I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you. And I call on George Adam to respond on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, as I said last week, the most important individuals and people in this are the families and people that suffered because of the decisions made by the Post Office. And I think that's what we must all think of when we're dealing with this issue in particular. And I mentioned last week that's the reason why we are looking at doing legislation, so that we can ensure that they have that protection and they know that the horror of what's happened to them has come to an end. Bureau is aware that there are important protocols that must be followed in terms of introduction of legislation. And following the period of pre-introduction scrutiny, the bill is expected to be introduced on the 14th of May and published by Parliament on the 15th of May. Current expectations are that Stage 1 will be on the 21st of May and Stage 2 on the 22nd of May. And this will allow MSPs any opportunity to see the terms of the Scottish Bill ahead of Stage 1. And it will be down the process Mr Ross mentioned.
Douglas Ross.
grateful to the Minister for giving way. Given that important process is now just a matter of weeks away, can he confirm that this Parliament will hear from the Lord Advocate before that bill is introduced, to allow us for the first time since January to understand if she still believes that there should be no mass exoneration of sub-postmasters, or if she has changed her mind?
Minister.
I appreciate the tone that Mr Ross is taking this week, and equally I will say to Mr Ross that once again we have to think of the families outside of this place that are dealing with this, want to know that we are going to actually create the legislation to make that difference, to make that change, to bring an end to some of the issues. So the stage 3, as I said, will follow as soon as the UK bill is finalised, so that any changes to the bill can be considered and, where appropriate, reflected in the Scottish bill. Timing will be kept under review given the uncertainty around the timing of the UK bill, but it's important for me, Presiding Officer, that everybody knows that we will have the process to be able to go through this, ask our questions and go through that process to make sure finally these families, these people have an end to something horrible that was brought about by the Post Office in the UK.
Thank you. And the question is that Amendment 13118.1 in the name of Douglas Ross, which seeks to amend Motion 13118 in the name of George Adam on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau on changes to the business programme, be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. Therefore, we will move to a vote, and there will be a short suspension to allow members to access the digital voting system. Thank you. The question is that Amendment 13118.1 in the name of Douglas Ross, which seeks to amend Motion 13118 in the name of George Adam on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau on changes to the business programme, be agreed, and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 13118.1 in the name of Douglas Ross is yes 55, no 70. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. The next question is that motion 13118 in the name of George Adam on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau on changes to the business programme be agreed. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed. The next item of business is topical questions, and at question number 1 I call Colin Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to reports that a large volume of data has been published onto the dark web following the recent cyber attack on NHS Dumfries and Galloway.
Cabinet Secretary Neil Gray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government is working with NHS Dumfries and Galloway, Police Scotland and other agencies, as we have done from first being alerted to the cyber attack, to assess the level of this breach and the implications for individuals concerned. At my request, NHS Dumfries and Galloway have briefed local MSPs on the situation and issued a statement to staff and the public. A dedicated telephone helpline is now open to the public, and the Scottish Government continues to provide support to the board as they deal with this ongoing situation and the live policing investigation.
Colin Smith.
Presiding Officer, there is nothing more personal than someone's medical data, so this serious development will be deeply worrying for patients and staff of NHS Dumfries and Galloway, who will all be asking the question, does this breach affect them and their loved ones? NHS Dumfries and Galloway now know what data files have been released, and that is a substantial amount of data, including on children's health. But we also know it will take time for them to work through their data to identify which individuals are affected. Now, given how important it is that any vulnerable people who may be impacted by this breach, what specific resources are being provided to NHS Dumfries and Galloway by the Scottish Government to ensure that the search of data is conducted as quickly as possible and individuals are identified and supported?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Colin Smith for his question, and I concur with him that for patients and staff across NHS Dumfries and Galloway, this is not only very personal but also a very worrying time, and I not just accept that, I acknowledge that that is the case. As I mentioned earlier, I'm limited in what I can say. However, I can inform Colin Smith, that the Scottish Cyber Coordination Centre within the Scottish Government has stood up the Scottish Multi-Agency Cyber Incident Support Arrangements. These arrangements bring national agencies, including the National Cyber Security Centre, Police Scotland, National Crime Agency, the NHS Cyber Centre of Excellence and Scottish Government policy leads together to support Dumfries and Galloway to respond and recover from the incident. And as well as practical advice and support, the Scottish Government has alerted the wider public sector to the incident and shared relevant information. This, I hope, will enable public sector organisations to take preventative steps to defend against similar attacks.
Colin Smith.
Ransom demands from the perpetrators of the cyber attack were never going to be met, so it was always highly likely they would follow through with their threats to release this data and cause the maximum disruption and distress. Now that data is on the dark web, what assessment has the government made of the likelihood of other criminals being able to access this information, notwithstanding how challenging that is, then being able to use that information to target individuals whose data has been released? Because that will be a concern for patients and staff in Dumfries and Galloway.
Cabinet Secretary.
Again, I thank Colin Smith for his question, because I think he's absolutely right. Breach of confidential data is an incredibly serious matter, and I want to reiterate NHS Dumfries and Galloway's call for staff and the public to be on their guard for any attempt to access their systems or approaches from anyone claiming to be in possession of data relating to them. And if anyone finds themselves in this situation, they should contact Police Scotland immediately by calling 101.
Oliver Mundell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This worrying attack comes at the worst possible time, adding additional pressure to already hard-pressed staff and to a health board who are struggling to find huge funding cuts. As well as making that IT support available, will the Cabinet Secretary explore what additional emergency funding can be put in place to ease those pressures at the board and make sure that the Chief Executive can focus on sorting this out rather than having to balance the books at this exact minute?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank Oliver Mundell for his question. There has been minimal impact in terms of patient care as a result of this. However, I do know that this incident has resulted in the need for some staff to change working practices in the short term, and I'm very grateful to everyone who is working to ensure people still receive the best possible care while we work at pace to ensure a return to normal working practices. The Government has made significant investments to all boards. We've seen a real terms increase to NHS boards as a result of the most recent budget, and of course our teams continue to work with boards across the country on their financial resilience, and should there be particular asks, then of course I would be receptive to at least hearing them, even if during a very difficult financial situation as we're all facing across the public sector, I may not be able to commit to fully being able to realise those.
Emma Harper.
This latest announcement about the cyber attack displays the very real implications for staff and for the public of cyber attacks, with personal details now freely published on the dark web. We also saw just yesterday how China successfully hacked the UK Department of Defence. These attacks are going to continue to happen with serious consequences. Can the Cabinet Secretary give a commitment that the Scottish Government is examining the cyber resilience of all our public institutions to protect the public and indeed those working in these vital services? And can the Cabinet Secretary to just reconfirm that it is adequately supporting NHS Dumfries and Galloway to have the resources needed to assess and action this cyber attack?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, President Officer, and I thank Emma Harper for her question. I can give those assurances. We continually review and regularly audit all health boards' cyber resilience. No, Emma Harper would understand for security reasons I can't go into detail of that, but they take part in an annual audit process assessing their effectiveness against the public sector cyber resilience framework, and it allows them to be as resilient as possible, reducing the likelihood and impact of cyber attacks. And that has aided their ability to respond promptly when this attack was discovered, minimising the impact to staff and the public. And in the most recent round of audits, the Scottish Health Component Authority, Competent Authority, noted that auditors found Dumfries and Galloway had demonstrated clear commitment to the audit process.
Finlay Carson.
Presiding Officer, we know that 91 folders have been published on the dark web, including highly sensitive information surrounding patients' confidential records and staff details. And while I appreciate there will be details of the attack that cannot be discussed and that the Cabinet Secretary will be taking advice from the National Cyber Security Unit, can I ask if he knows if the network was exploited because of a weakness in the security system or if someone's credentials were used? And furthermore, can you set out exactly how technically the NHS and Dumfries and Galloway are being supported to ensure all systems are back online, which will help address the anxiety and the concerns of patients and staff?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank Finlay Carson. Reiterate what I said in response to Emma Harper, that the NHS boards go through regular annual audit processes in terms of their cyber security, and the authority that conducted that noted Dumfries and Galloway's clear commitment to that audit process. He'll understand that I can't go into significant detail around that for obvious security reasons. But in answer to his follow-up question around patient services, there has been minimal impact on patient services. The majority of patient services have continued as normal. Patients should have noticed very little change. However, I'm conscious that there is the possibility of continued impact, which is why we're continuing to support them in ensuring that they are able to recover from this as quickly as possible.
Tess White.
There was a major cyber attack on NHS Scotland in 2022, which crippled the NHS systems and disrupted services. So what steps were implemented then to prevent a major breach like this from happening again, and why did they fail?
Cabinet Secretary.
As I've said in response to previous questions, the audit process of reviewing cybersecurity across all elements of the health service is kept under constant review, and it's an annual audit process for which, as I've already set out, the competent authority confirmed that Dumfries and Galloway was cooperative with that process and I believe has done everything possible to prevent it. As we've seen from cyber attacks conducted elsewhere, this is an incredibly difficult time to defend against what is increasingly sophisticated actors that are looking to infiltrate our systems, including the Ministry of Defence most recently. So all that we can do is continue to support, learn from the situations that have gone past and ensure that our resilience is as strong as possible, and that's what the government will continue to do, not just with the Dumfries and Galloway, but with other health boards and public sector organisations going forward.
Question number 2, Stephen Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government, in light of recently reported developments, what plans are being made to support the continued operation of the Grangemouth Refinery?
Cabinet Secretary Mary McCallum.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government continues to engage extensively with owners of the Grangemouth Refinery and is committed to securing a long-term sustainable future for the industrial cluster. The future configuration of the Grangemouth Refinery is a commercial matter for the owners. However, we have a track record of supporting businesses at Grangemouth as they progress their low-carbon projects, and we are committed to working collaboratively with Petroenius to accelerate its own projects at the site.
Stephen Kerr.
Well, I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her reply, and I hope she will join with me in paying tribute to the positive campaign that has been run and is being run by Unite the Union. And it's aptly called Keep Grangemouth Working. And I, as a Conservative, have no hesitation in backing that campaign to keep Grangemouth working, because the campaign asks 3 things: to extend the lifetime of the refinery, invest in new technology and support for greener and cleaner energy projects. So from her engagement with Petroenius, can the Cabinet Secretary confirm Martin Williams's front page story in the Herald this morning that the hydrocracker has been restarted? And what impact does this return to sustained profitability mean for extending the life of the refinery?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I'm very pleased to join with Stephen Kerr in recognising the work of Unite the Union, and by extension I should like to again put on record my thanks to the workers at Grangemouth, the highly skilled workers who contribute so much to this asset of strategic importance to Scotland. As regards media coverage today, I am of course aware of it. It explores the issue of the hydrocracker at the Grangemouth Refinery. This is purely an operational matter for the company, and one which is commercially sensitive. It's not appropriate for me to speculate or to theorise on what is essentially media speculation at this point, but what I can assure Stephen Kerr and indeed the Chamber is that ministers and officials engage regularly with all those with an interest at the cluster, including with the business, to understand the impact of current operations, of course with an interest in their operation today and how that progresses into the future.
Stephen Kerr.
Well, I thank the Minister for her response, but I hope that she would agree that it is a matter of interest for her and her team to find out whether or not the hydrocracker has been restarted. I think we have it from multiple sources that it has, and this is a significant development. Now, I can't help thinking that this window of opportunity that the restarting of the hydrocracker brings is not unrelated to the end of the Butte House Agreement. And I want to echo what Derek Thompson of Unite has said in the light of the return to healthy profits for Petroineos at Grangemouth. He said, the only sensible commercial decision to be made is to maintain the refinery's operations and in doing so retain 500 highly skilled jobs. I say hear to that. Investing in cleaner and greener energy projects at Grangemouth is a major strategic issue for the whole of Britain. So I ask the Minister, both governments must work together with local interests to secure the future of the site and the local economy. So what discussions has the Cabinet Secretary had with UK ministers, and what have they agreed? And in addition to the local council, Forth Valley College and Petroineos, which other local businesses have been recruited to the Grangemouth Future Industry Board?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I'll be glad to share a copy of the cast list for the Grangemouth Future Industry Board with the member. It's quite extensive, and so I will do that in writing. I would encourage him, given the importance he places on this, and that I do as well, not to theorise or indulge ourselves in theories about political configuration on the one hand, and what is essentially commercial matters for Petroineos to take on the other. But allow me to restate, firstly, that it's not appropriate for me to comment on media speculation, but to reinforce the point that ministers and officials are very closely engaged with the development of these matters. And I suppose close my response by highlighting that our objective, given the strategic importance of Grangemouth, is to maximise transition opportunities, to minimise any gap between those emerging and transition happening, and all of that with a view to securing as many jobs as possible.
Michelle Thompson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We all agree in the need to secure the refinery and jobs in such an important industrial cluster in my constituency. However, we also agree in the need for this to be done sustainably. So to that end, can the Cabinet Secretary update on the calls to the UK Government removing the regulatory barriers around sustainable aviation fuels and thus allow a future possibility of the site as a biorefinery?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, Michelle Thompson is absolutely right to highlight the opportunity of biorefining as a potential transition opportunity for the cluster. Ministers have made several representations to the UK Government for engagement on issues surrounding sustainable aviation fuel. Initial indications did suggest that the UK's proposed post-Brexit SAF mandate would inhibit HEFA use, a key inhibitor thereafter to the development of SAF. However, more recent developments do appear to present a more positive picture, but we will continue pressing that. I am in ongoing dialogue with UK ministers, both in the Scotland office and in the Department for Energy on this matter, and I will be very glad to keep Michelle Thompson up to date on that, given I understand her concern for this issue.
Sarah Boyack.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Will the Cabinet Secretary confirm that the Just Transition Plan for Grangemouth will be published this month? And does she acknowledge that staff who work in Grangemouth need assurance that their skills, their knowledge, their experience will be key to the just transition to cleaner, greener energy projects which can make Grangemouth successful and Scotland leaders in renewable energy and meet the aspirations that Unite are expanding as absolutely critical for us to support now?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I agree with a great deal of what Sarah Boyack has said. Our Just Transition Plan for Grangemouth Industrial Cluster will outline what will be a truly first-of-its-kind vision for the site, outlining the long-term operations that we would hope to see take place by 2045. Beyond that vision, the plan will also set out and chart a series of actions that will be required to secure that vision, focusing on securing long-term investment, developing technical and commercially viable solutions for manufacturing, and how we foster the correct policy environment for all of that. And the work to finalise the Just Transition Plan is underway just now, and I expect it to be published very soon indeed.
Ash Regan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Having raised the need for urgent action on this, I welcome the news that we are hearing that Petro-Ineos has invested in and has restarted the hydrocracker, and that the site is turning a profit. The Save Grangemouth campaign that was headed by my Westminster colleague Kenny McCaskill aligns with a recent survey by Unite Union, strongly indicating that there has been collective failure on Grangemouth support by governments. What substantive commitment will the Government now make to ensure the long-term sustainable future of this core asset to Scotland's energy industry that is not a cliff edge for both workers and Scotland's energy security?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the Government is absolutely clear about the strategic importance of the Grangemouth complex. That's why its future and future-proofing the complex is a priority for us. It is important to our economy, it is important to our energy mix, it is vital to the workforce of Grangemouth and to the communities around it. That's why, whilst decisions regarding the companies and the site are for the commercial entities in control there, we are determinedly working with all parties with an interest on a future plan. We are meeting all of those who have a stake. We are investing, including in plans for future low-carbon study opportunities, and it's why we are planning. And I would just end by restating that point, that our ambition is to maximise transition opportunities, minimise gaps and secure as many jobs as possible.
Daniel Johnson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her answers so far, and yet she stopped short of committing to the publishing of the Just Transition Plan. Can she confirm that it will be published by the end of the month? And given that if you look at the Scottish Government's webpage, the Future Industry Board, it states that it's updating its work stream priorities for 2023, 5 months into 2024, is she comfortable with the pace and the volume of actions it has been taking to date?
In relation to the substantive question, Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And in respect of the Just Transition Plan for Grangemouth, as I said in response to Sarah Boyack, the work to bring both the vision and the actions that will be set out in it are nearing completion, and the plan, I expect, will be published very soon indeed.
Thank you. That concludes topical questions. The next item of business is a personal statement by Humza Yousaf. There should be no interventions or interruptions, and I call on Humza Yousaf.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm grateful for the opportunity to make a final statement from the front benches. It gives me the opportunity to put on record some thanks to several people who have supported me on the incredible journey that I've been blessed to be on over the last 12 years as a Minister in the Government. I will say no more about my wonderful family, partly because there are really no words to convey my love for them for putting up with me over the last 12 years and beyond, but also because I did promise my 15-year-old that I wouldn't embarrass her again by crying on national television. So my thanks, first of all, are to you, Presiding Officer, and those who preceded you for the fairness that you have shown me during my time on the front benches. I, of course, intend on repaying that fairness by being a model backbencher who will be on their best behaviour. I don't believe the opposition are laughing. Who will be on their best behaviour, at least, Presiding Officer, for the first few weeks anyway. Many of us, I think, will be in a reflective mood as we mark 25 years of devolution this week. I'm certain that I'm not the only one who reread over Donald Dewar's historic and remarkable opening speech when this Parliament was reconvened. And there are many lines that could be quoted, but one in particular stood out for me this week. And I quote, "This is about more than our politics and our laws. This is about who we are and how we carry ourselves." And in that vein, let me offer thanks to every single colleague across the political divide for the kindnesses you have shown me over the years. We often, and I'm guilty of this too, lament the toxic nature of our political debate. And it's true, there is an entrenched tribalism that feels difficult to free ourselves from. However, I will remember far more fondly the kindness and generosity of colleagues over the years. I got to witness that kindness when I made my first ever speech to this chamber on the 2nd of June 2011. After making my speech, a certain one, Tavish Scott, shortly followed with his own contribution thereafter. And he addressed me directly and said, "If that is the standard of your first speech, I cannot wait for the next one and the next one and the next one." I suspect Tavish Scott didn't quite expect me to drone on for as long as I have. However, that one compliment, that one moment of kindness from a very senior MSP in this Parliament made me feel 10 feet tall. It cost Tavish Scott nothing, yet settled this very nervous 26-year-old new entrant to the chamber and gave me a confidence to ensure that I bettered myself. So what I'm really trying to say, Presiding Officer, this is all Tavish Scott's fault. No, I jest, of course. I've had many such instances of kindness over the years, from my own SNP colleagues and to those right across the political spectrum. They've come at some of the most difficult times in my life. For example, when my in-laws were recently trapped in Gaza. But they've also come at times of great celebration. For example, when my daughter Amal was born 5 years ago. The purpose of mentioning this is to remind myself and others, I hope, that kindness costs us nothing. Being good to one another costs us nothing. Being compassionate to one another costs us nothing, yet can, quite literally, make a whole world of difference. So for all the kindness shown to me by colleagues over the years, thank you. Presiding Officer, let me also take this moment to thank the incredible civil service for their unwavering dedication to our country. I cannot possibly thank every member of my private office over the years, or indeed all the civil servants I've had the great pleasure of working closely with. But I am so grateful to each and every one of them for their support over the years. There are sections of our society, our politics, our media, who enjoy denigrating civil servants, who see them as an easy target. And such lazy commentary is often so far from the truth. Our civil servants work tirelessly for their country, not seeking the limelight, but quietly and diligently getting on with the job of serving Scotland, often going above and beyond the call of duty. And for that, they have my eternal thanks and my admiration. Presiding Officer, I have had the greatest privilege of my life serving my country in government for almost 12 years. As Minister for External Affairs and International Development, Minister for Transport, Cabinet Secretary for Justice, Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care, and of course, most recently, as First Minister. So my thanks must go to the people who gave me that opportunity by electing me to this place, the good people of Glasgow in 2011 and the fine people of Glasgow Pollock since 2016, who have continued to put their trust in me to stand up for them and to serve them. And also to my predecessors as First Minister for giving this boy opportunities he could only have imagined in his wildest dreams. I'm grateful for the trust that you put in me over the years. Because you see, Presiding Officer, young Humza Yousaf could never have imagined that he would be able to lead this country. I was 6 years old when I was first told to go home. And I'm afraid since then it's been a regular occurrence. In fact, almost daily if you look at my social media feeds. And I won't lie, Presiding Officer, it is that racial slur that probably hurts me the most. Very simply because I have no other home than this one. I never will. I never have. My heart will forever belong to Scotland. So to have the opportunity to defy the far right, to defy the racists, to defy the bigots who told me to go home, but be in a position to serve my home, to contribute to public life in my home, and to have had the opportunity to lead my home, well, that has been the most tremendous honour that I didn't think was reserved for people who looked like me. And there I have broken my promise to my 15-year-old daughter. I hope that from my example, other little boys and girls who look or sound different know that it is our differences which make us unique, that should be celebrated as part of a modern and diverse Scotland, and that in no way should those differences ever hold you back from achieving your dreams. And lastly, to my successor, to my dear friend John Swinney. John is one of the most empathetic, kind, compassionate people that I've had the pleasure of knowing over the years. Such qualities are crucial in life. They are absolutely necessary as First Minister. I remember Nicola Sturgeon saying to me that as First Minister, you get to make someone's day every single day in office. I'm also quite possibly making somebody's day by leaving office, I suspect too. However, I can testify that Nicola Sturgeon was absolutely right. You can make someone's day through the smallest act of kindness, stopping for a selfie with someone, or through transformative policy like the Scottish Child Payment. The privilege of serving the people of Scotland through this office never gets tiring. I know John will do his family proud, he will do our party proud, and he will do our nation proud as he dedicates his life to the service of Scotland, the country we are all proud to call home and that we all love so dearly. To conclude, Presiding Officer, I will take some time to refamiliarise myself with the backbenches, as I intend on being an active contributor to this Parliament, as my constituents, of course, would expect me to be. And I will continue to champion those issues that are close to my heart, ensuring that I give a voice to the voiceless, be they at home or indeed overseas. And in that vein, I cannot let today's remarks go by without pleading one last time from the front benches for the international community to stop any further massacre of the innocent people of Gaza. A full-scale invasion of Rafah, home to 1.4 million people, 600,000 children, will only result in the slaughter of more innocent civilians and what is likely to be one of the clearest violations of international law to date. A clear signal must be sent to the Israeli government that to defy the international community in this way will come with significant consequence and sanction. Everything possible must be done to demand an immediate ceasefire, a release of all the hostages and an end to arms sales to Israel. We must be on the right side of history, and that must mean standing with innocent men, women and children. To do otherwise would be unforgivable. Presiding Officer, my time as First Minister is now over. However, I am absolutely certain that for the rest of my life, every Thursday at 1 minute to 12 in the afternoon, that my palms will begin to sweat and that knot in my stomach will tighten. That comes, Presiding Officer, from a place of a deep respect for this Parliament and to all of those in opposition, and indeed to my own colleagues here alongside me. That respect will always continue to be there. I hope we can all live up to the hopes of the founding fathers and mothers of devolution and work together in the interest of the common good, the interest of the common weal, and do so with kindness. Thank you, Presiding Officer. It has been an honour and a privilege.
Thank you. Thank you. And on behalf of the Parliament, I thank Humza Yousaf for his service as First Minister, and I suspend this meeting until 3 p.m. The next item of business is the selection of the Parliament's nominee as First Minister. A note explaining the procedures to be followed this afternoon has been made available to members. I have received 4 valid nominations for the selection of the Parliament's nominee for First Minister, and I will now announce the nominations in alphabetical order. The nominations are Alex Cole-Hamilton, Douglas Ross, Anna Sarwar and John Swinney. And I will ask each nominee to speak in support of their candidacy for up to 5 minutes, and there should be no interventions or interruptions. After the nominees have spoken, members will be asked to cast their vote for their preferred candidate. A separate vote will be called for each candidate, and members can vote only once. And once all voting has been completed, any member who has not yet voted will be invited to cast a vote to abstain. And there will be a short suspension while the result is verified. And I will then announce the results of voting. A candidate will be elected if an overall majority is obtained. If no majority is obtained, the candidate or candidates with the smallest number of votes will be eliminated. And I would ask members to note that if we have a vote between only 2 candidates, all that's required is a simple majority for one of the candidates to be elected. Members may wish to record an abstention, and no account of those votes will be taken in establishing whether a simple majority has been achieved, and will then proceed to a further round of voting. I call on Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you very much indeed, Presiding Officer, and I offer my candidacy for the Office of First Minister of Scotland. I do so because while the governing party may have elected to forego any democratic process to test the ideas or motivations of their candidate, I don't think that Parliament should. Now, I do so more in hope than in expectation, but that hope among Liberal Democrats is growing, a hope self-evident in last week's English local election results, which saw us overhaul the Conservative Party for the first time in a generation, in Scottish opinion polls, which consistently show us growing significantly in this place, set to return many more MSPs, and in council elections results the length and breadth of Scotland. This Liberal revival is well and truly underway. Presiding Officer, as the outgoing First Minister has just said, this week we commemorate a quarter century of our reconvened Scottish Parliament. In the weeks following his installation as Deputy First Minister in 1999, my predecessor, the then leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats, Jim Wallace, said, "Government involves hard choices and broad responsibilities. And there are inevitably times when the comfort zone of easy opposition beckons." Presiding Officer, I have spent enough time in opposition, watching government ministers make poor decisions that make the lives of our constituents poorer still. And so I stand today. And those were simpler times. You could see your GP at the first time of asking, and your dentist still offered NHS care. Scottish education was amongst the best in the world, and all the ferries worked. It was so much easier to rent somewhere to live or to buy your first home. Our economy was growing and business thrived. But for nearly 20 years, the SNP have been ignoring the people who do most of the heavy lifting in our society. You're working harder, but it feels like you're falling further behind, like you're being taken for granted. Presiding Officer, we need ministers that won't make empty promises, but will get the basics right. We need new hope in our politics, and hope is at the heart of everything the Scottish Liberal Democrats stand for. We want to create world-class mental health services by taxing the social media giants who cause so much of the problem. That will help get you faster access to your GP, and will make sure you can see an NHS dentist too. We will lift up Scottish education again by tackling the violence in our schools with more teachers and more in-class support. We'll reduce your bills and tackle climate change by rolling out a national insulation programme, and we'll get the government-owned water company to clean up its act and stop filling our rivers and our beaches with sewage. We want to offer a fair deal for our communities as well, by actually giving power away from politicians back to local people, to answer the housing emergency by building more homes, encouraging confidence in investors and answering the needs of tenants and homeowners alike, to connect our communities with trains, buses and ferries that you can depend on. Presiding Officer, When this Parliament was reconvened, some of the challenges we now face must have seemed then almost inconceivable. The climate emergency, war in continental Europe, long COVID, cyber attacks on our health service, and the insidious reach of abused technology. Those challenges now require a response rooted not in the divisions of the past 17 years, but rather in cooperation here and beyond our borders. Is why Liberal Democrats want to put Scotland at the heart of a reformed Britain and to fix our broken relationship with Europe. Presiding Officer, the outcome of this election is already decided. I understand that. But if our new democracy, or a relatively new democracy, is about anything, it is about the exchange of ideas and of competing visions of what our country can become. So I humbly submit my candidacy today, and with it, a Liberal vision for the future of Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you, and I call on Douglas Ross.
It seems pretty likely that the leader of the largest minority party in Parliament, with the help of the fourth largest minority party, will be successful in this afternoon's election. Not my words, but actually the words of John Swinney, when he was last SNP leader and seeking this Parliament's support to elect him as First Minister. That was 21 years ago, in May 2003. They say a week is a long time in politics, and I think the last 7 days have shown us that. But it is interesting to see John Swinney back seeking the support of this Parliament more than 2 decades on from his previous attempt. But today, Presiding Officer, I'm putting my name forward once more for the position of First Minister, because it is past time that Scotland has a leader focused on the issues that really matter to our nation, not another nationalist leader focused on the narrow political interests of the SNP. When this Parliament was elected almost exactly 3 years ago, Scotland was still in the midst of the COVID pandemic. And at that time, we all promised, each and every one of us, that we would put normal politics aside and focus on the national interest. Yet before all of the votes were even counted, the SNP had reverted to type, claiming that the election was a mandate for independence. And that has set the tone for this session. Gone was the golden opportunity to deliver transformative change for the people that we are so privileged to serve. Instead, we've now seen 3 SNP leaders saying that independence was and is their priority, and using this chamber and the Scottish Government as vehicles to campaign for it. It's abundantly clear that Scotland needs fresh leadership focused on the national interest. But the SNP have responded to calls for change by replacing one continuity candidate with another, by going backwards instead of forwards. This shows that the SNP can't change, that they will be the same distracted nationalist government, run by the same people that we've seen for the last 17 years. After a decade of division, we need to get back to the priorities of the Scottish people. And that is the platform on which I and the Scottish Conservatives are proud to stand on. We're standing today to represent the people's priorities against an SNP government that only ever puts independence first. We believe Scotland can succeed now. The SNP think it can only succeed in some fantasy future. We think that the focus should be on the country's big challenges, not the SNP's obsession with independence. We want to improve our schools, not the SNP's plan to spend more money on promoting separation. We believe that our NHS should be focused on clearing patient treatment backlogs, not pushing the SNP's dangerous gender ideology on kids. We want free speech, not the SNP's Hate Crime Act. We want to upgrade key roads and fix potholes, not penalise drivers with the SNP's workplace parking tax. We want to support 100,000 workers in Scotland's oil and gas industry, while the SNP wants to shut that sector down. We're standing up for rural Scotland, while the SNP continue to pursue a centralisation agenda. We would protect local services and our councils, while the SNP are stripping them of the powers and the funding they need. We want to make Scotland competitive within the UK, not punish families and businesses with SNP taxes. We want the country to unite for a stronger Scotland, not John Swinney's slogan, to unite for independence. Now, Presiding Officer, I'm not expecting to be elected as First Minister today. We already know that the SNP have done a backroom deal with the Greens to ensure that they abstain on the vote so that John Swinney will win. But beyond this chamber, the Scottish people are watching. Later this year, we will have a general election. And in that election, Scottish Conservative candidates will be standing across the country to beat the SNP and end their obsession with independence once and for all. We can see off John Swinney, just like we saw off Humza Yousaf, and get the focus onto the issues that really matter. If voters unite behind the Scottish Conservatives in key seats right across Scotland, that is the opportunity for us all. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call on Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, Scotland needs stable and competent government. At a time when we face the twin challenges of the cost of living crisis, with families struggling to make ends meet, and an NHS crisis where too many Scots are struggling to access life-saving NHS treatment, we need a government that rises to those challenges, the biggest since devolution. Instead, we have an SNP government that is proving to be incompetent, divided and chaotic. The change of SNP leader and First Minister has actually nothing to do with delivering for Scotland. This is all about managing internal divisions within the SNP and nothing to do with actually running our country. Now, Presiding Officer, it's been a little over a year since we last met to elect a First Minister. And while the headlines will focus on the political personalities, it is worth reminding ourselves that incompetence has consequences, and the very same failures we raised last year are worse today. So we need more than just platitudes or promises of a different way of working or a re-emphasis of this government pretending its priorities are those of the people. We heard the exact same last year, and Scots are experiencing even worse outcomes now than they were then. Last year, we demanded action on the NHS crisis to bring down waiting lists. They're now longer, not shorter. Now over 820,000 Scots stuck on an NHS waiting list. Last year, we demanded action to tackle the record levels of homelessness. Today, it's worse, with almost 10,000 children living in temporary accommodation with no home to call their own. Last year, we demanded action to tackle the appalling levels of drug deaths. But suspected drug deaths have shamefully increased by 10% in that time. Last year, we demanded action on closing the attainment gap in our education system. Today, we see increased violence in our schools and continued decline in international league tables of our once great education system. So, for all John Swinney and the SNP want to pretend that this is day one of a new government, the hard fact is that after 17 years of this SNP government, there is not a single institution that is stronger. Every single one is weaker on their watch. Now, Presiding Officer, I have no illusions about the outcome of today's vote. Terrified of the electorate, the SNP will once again put their party's interest before the national interest. But I don't believe, and more importantly, the public don't believe, that continuity will cut it, or that this chaos and incompetence is as good as it gets. But let me quote John Swinney in 2001. We meet this afternoon to elect a new First Minister for the third time in this Parliament. The third occasion is the result of a farce inflicted on Scotland and its Parliament by, on this occasion, the SNP, and by absolutely nobody else. The party that now, without any democratic process, seeks to foist its unelected leader upon our country, the party that promotes its own by making cronyism a way of life, always lets Scotland down. This afternoon, the farce may be carried to its illogical conclusion. Given that's what John Swinney's view was then, why does he now fear the judgment of the Scottish people today? Because, Presiding Officer, now more than ever, our country needs credible and effective leadership. People need a government on their side, focused on creating jobs and lowering bills. They need a government that will renew and repair our NHS, putting patients and staff first. A government focused on building new homes and ending the housing emergency. A government that will raise education standards and bring opportunities to every community. A government that believes in economic growth and that is willing to unlock the potential of every Scot to deliver it. A government of integrity that will restore trust and hope in our politics and that rejects the politics of division and despair. And Scotland needs a First Minister who is focused on the future, not defending a record of failure or focused on the past. Scotland needs a First Minister who knows that they are here in the service of the whole country, not just their political party. And Scotland needs a First Minister who genuinely wants to bring this country together to build a better nation, not pit Scot against Scot. I believe change is possible. I believe Scotland's best days do lie ahead of us. So when the people do finally get their say, I am determined to win their trust, win their support and deliver the change Scotland needs.
Thank you. And I call on John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, I am greatly honoured to be a nominee for First Minister of Scotland. This year is a year of anniversaries for our new democracy. It is 25 years, as colleagues have said, since the establishment of this Parliament, and it's 10 years since the referendum on Scottish independence. So it is a time to reflect, but more importantly, to look to the future. Both those democratic events were a result of growing demand from many people in Scotland for self-government. The extent of that self-government journey is still a matter of debate, but we are all sitting here today because a sizable majority believe that in key aspects of Scottish life it is better for decisions about Scotland to be made here in Scotland. The Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats should take pride in governing Scotland through the difficult early years of devolution, when much of the debate was about the cost of this building, rather than about what we could do with the powers invested in it. The Conservatives, under the leadership of Annabel, now Baroness Golding, can look back with great credit on the constructive way they often approached opposition, and they certainly helped me with a budget or two. The Scottish Greens have brought a distinctive voice to our politics and became the first Greens to serve in government in the United Kingdom. My party, the SNP, has used the powers of this Parliament to abolish tuition fees and prescription charges. We have brought in a more progressive income tax system, and through the Scottish Child Payment we are lifting children out of poverty. Indeed, the Scottish Child Payment has been hailed as the most significant measure to tackle child poverty anywhere in Europe in 40 years. And in our National Health Service, despite its challenges, we have the best performing core A&E departments in the United Kingdom. Policy and record, of course, is a matter of debate and contest. But there is something I hope we can all agree on. I'm proud that it was an SNP government that was led by the first woman First Minister and then by the first Muslim First Minister. I want to pay tribute to Humza Yousaf, a man of unfailing courtesy who served my party but also this Parliament and his country with distinction. When Humza Yousaf announced his resignation, he said this: "To my colleagues in the opposition, regardless of political party, I genuinely only wish you well. I bear no ill will and certainly bear no grudges against anyone." That is the dignified mark of a man I'm proud to call a colleague and friend. Throughout all of these 25 years of this Parliament, I've been privileged to serve my constituents and the people of Scotland. Indeed, I was a little perturbed to see listed in the entry in the Parliament website this morning, under the heading Previous Roles, the following statement: "John has had 22 previous roles." The old joke about giving a busy man more to do seems relevant at this moment. Under the heading Parliamentary and Government Roles, as of this morning, it says, "John does not have any parliamentary or government roles." It's that entry which I would like to change after this afternoon's vote. I hope we can all recognise that despite our political differences, we are all here because we want the best for Scotland, whatever our specific role happens to be. For me, it is with all my experience, but with much more than that, with my burning ambition for a better future for this country, that I am seeking to become First Minister. The idea of ambition brings me to the second of this year's anniversaries, the independence referendum of 2014. Both those who are against independence and those who are in favour deserve to be heard. Through dialogue, debate and deliberation, I believe it's possible to argue respectfully our different positions. For my part, I look at the years since 2014 and I see the impact of Brexit, the policy of UK austerity, the economic damage of the mini-budget, the fact that wages in the UK have stagnated, productivity is too low and inequality is far too high. I look at those independent countries that are comparable to Scotland, that are wealthier and more equal than the UK, and it reinforces my core belief that Scottish self-government is the right way forward for Scotland. Those of us who believe in independence do so because we believe it will equip this Parliament with the powers it needs to match the success of those comparable independent states. That, in turn, will mean more resources for our National Health Service and our public services, the opportunity to grow our economy free from a broken Westminster economic model, and the prospect of rejoining the European Union and escaping the damage of Brexit. I recognise that in all of this, it is essential for a First Minister to listen to other people's perspectives. That will be, of course, what I do. That includes listening to the people who voted for a pro-independence Parliament in 2021, listening also to those who take a different view, and then engaging in the lifeblood of our democracy, persuasion based on evidence whilst respecting honest and honourable differences. In that spirit, Presiding Officer, building on the achievements in government, a focus on the economy, our National Health Service and the public services, a drive to lift children out of poverty, and through patient dialogue that I ask for the support of Parliament in becoming Scotland's next First Minister.
Thank you. Before we move on to the vote, there will be a short suspension. Can I ask all members who voted earlier to please refresh their voting app? Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. We now move to voting. And may I remind members that they must vote once only and must only use their yes button in the voting app when voting. Once the voting for candidates is completed, members who have not voted for a candidate will then be given the opportunity to vote to abstain by pressing their yes button. And I will announce the result once all votes have been cast and verified. The first vote is for Alex Cole-Hamilton. Only members who wish to cast their vote for Alex Cole-Hamilton should take part in this vote by voting yes. No other member should vote. Members who wish to vote for Alex Cole-Hamilton should vote yes now. The vote is closed. Could any member who believes they were unable to cast their vote please advise by making a point of order? The next vote is for Douglas Ross. Only members who wish to cast their vote for Douglas Ross should take part in this vote by voting yes. No other members should vote. Members who wish to vote for Douglas Ross should vote yes now. The vote is closed. Could any member who believes they were unable to cast their vote please advise by making a point of order? The next vote is for Anas Sarwar. Only members who wish to cast their vote for Anas Sarwar should take part in this vote by voting yes. No other members should vote. Members who wish to vote for Anas Sarwar should vote yes now. The vote is closed. And could any member who believes they were unable to cast their vote please advise by making a point of order? The next vote is for John Swinney. Only members who wish to cast their vote for John Swinney should take part in this vote by voting yes. No other member should vote. Members who wish to vote for John Swinney should vote yes now. The vote is closed. Could any member who believes they were unable to cast their vote please advise by making a point of order? I call Marie Goujon for a point of order.
My app wouldn't load. I would have voted yes.
Thank you, Ms Goujon. We'll ensure your vote is recorded. I call Claire Haughey for a point of order.
Presiding Officer, I'm not sure if my vote went through. It's not come through on my app, and I would have voted yes.
Thank you, Ms Haughey. I can confirm that your vote was recorded. That concludes the votes for all candidates. The next vote is for any members who have not yet voted and who wish to record an abstention. Members wishing to abstain should press their yes button now. The vote is closed. Could any member who believes they were unable to cast their vote please advise by making a point of order? That concludes this round of voting. There will now be a suspension while the votes are verified. Thank you. In this round of voting, in the selection of the Parliament's nominee as First Minister, the number of votes cast for each candidate is as follows. Alex Cole-Hamilton, 4. Douglas Ross, 31. Anna Sarwar, 22. John Swinney, 64. There were 7 abstentions. As there is an overall majority for John Swinney, on behalf of the Parliament, I congratulate Mr Swinney as the Parliament's nominee for the position of First Minister and look forward to working with him. And I will call each of the party leaders to respond. I call Douglas Ross.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And I want to begin by congratulating John Swinney on his election as First Minister. The opportunity to lead the Scottish Government is the chance to serve every single person across our country, to give them the education they deserve, to ensure they can access the healthcare they need, to keep them safe from crime, and to help them to find the work that they need to provide for themselves and their family. That is a responsibility that should not be taken lightly. And I know that the First Minister, given his long career in Cabinet, will be acutely aware of the demands and that the decision to take up the role will not have been an easy one for him. And so I wish him well in taking on that burden. I also want to say how rightly proud his family must be today. We all know the strain that elective office has on our families, but that is magnified tenfold when the politician holds the office of First Minister. So on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives, we offer our strength and support to the entire Swinney family as they provide the personal backing that will be so important to our new First Minister. Turning now to the government he leads, it cannot just serve one side of the constitutional argument. It must deliver for the whole of Scotland. Because a government acting in the national interests is what the Scottish people deserve. Yet the SNP have failed to deliver that in their time in office. The legislative achievements of this session are few and far between. Instead, we saw the SNP government, having run out of its own ideas, increasingly look for policy direction from the extreme Greens. At the same time, they were continuing the push for the same old tire campaign for independence and a referendum. John Swinney must swiftly change course and deliver a bold new policy agenda for this SNP government instead of treading water like his predecessors. And it should start by ruling out any agreement, by the back door or otherwise, with the Greens. If he wants to lead a government that represents the values of a clear majority of our country, then he cannot be reliant on the Greens for his agenda. The SNP must reach beyond creating a nationalist coalition to compromise and find consensus within this Parliament. Key to delivering that would be putting the campaign for independence on the back burner. The First Minister and his party must treat today as a reset moment. They must bring an end to a decade of division that has plagued our country since the 2014 referendum. With our education system at record lows in international rankings, 1 in 7 Scots on an NHS waiting list, violent crime rising and our economy lagging behind the rest of the UK, Scotland faces significant challenges. Challenges that demand the SNP government's attention now. And in this, the 25th anniversary of our Scottish Parliament, it is clear that the institution is not living up to the promise that it offered to change the lives of people across Scotland for the better. The new First Minister must focus this chamber and his government back onto the issues that they were created to solve. Presiding Officer, while today may mark a new job for John Swinney, he has been at the heart of an SNP government for the last 17 years. He's been Alex Salmond's Finance Secretary, Nicola Sturgeon's Deputy and Humza Yousaf's most prominent supporter. He sat round the Cabinet table and rubber-stamped every single one of the policies they enacted. But now, at long last, and perhaps with some reluctance, he has a shot at the top job. We know the kind of government minister John Swinney has been. We even know the kind of SNP leader he has been. But John Swinney, the First Minister, remains unknown. Presiding Officer, Scotland waits to see whether he will be a nationalist leader like his predecessor, or, as we on these benches hope, a national leader that Scotland needs to take our country forward. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, on behalf of the Scottish Labour Party, I offer John Swinney my sincerest congratulations on being nominated as Scotland's next First Minister. I know that this will be a moment of tremendous pride for him and his family, the culmination of a long career of public service, one of which I know he has made many personal sacrifices. So I wish him and his loved ones well and the very best in the weeks and months to come. I must say I'm particularly pleased to see Mr Swinney's wife Elizabeth and his family in the gallery today. We send them our best wishes and love. Presiding Officer, we choose to be in politics, but our families don't. But it's often them that have to pay the heaviest burden and have the most significant impact. So, as others have said, we wish them all the very, very best for the future. Our political disagreements are many, but we share a common purpose to make Scotland the best place to grow up and grow old in. And I note Mr Swinney's comments that he will look to work across this chamber in a way that has sadly escaped his predecessors. We will continue to work constructively where we can and promote the national interest. We believe in the principles of devolution and the consensus that we can try and build across our Parliament. But I think it's important to note that the SNP, who have been one of the architects of divisive politics, so I do not question the rhetoric and the pretence of them now somehow being the great unifiers of our nation. So I hope we will finally do away with the use of words like traitors or the faux outrage in the language of betrayal that has come from far too many ministers, let alone activists. And I hope that this work can start immediately so we can move on and try to show the very best of Scotland. But, Presiding Officer, as I said before, I fear this election is more about managing the SNP rather than delivering for Scotland. We need more than just a change of leader or indeed a change in language. We need an acceptance of what's gone wrong, and we need a change of direction. At this time of national crisis, people need a government that is willing to lend a hand and support them, not feel abandoned by this government and indeed the UK government time and time again, politicians putting party before the country. Because the truth is that this internal stitch-up has delivered a continuity candidate who does bear responsibility for so much of the instability we have seen. So let's not pretend this is day one of a new SNP government. We shouldn't also forget that John Swinney, as Deputy First Minister during the COVID pandemic, was also responsible for deleting thousands of records and withholding evidence meant for the COVID inquiry. So yes, we need to see an end to the culture of secrecy and cover-up, but I fear the SNP have elected to the highest office one of its champions. We also need to see an end to the incompetence in managing our public services, but instead I think the SNP have elected perhaps the worst Education Secretary in the history of our Parliament, because in classrooms across the country, violence is on the rise, teachers feel unsupported, and pupils are being failed by our government who don't feel they have the same ambitions they do. And on the 25th anniversary of devolution, they have chosen as a man the Finance Secretary who decimated local government, sucked up power into Holyrood and decimated local services as a result. So I hope we see a new approach from John Swinney, one that genuinely puts the national interest before party interest, and the promise we make is that we will work constructively to make sure we achieve the best for Scotland and its people. But to put it bluntly, continuity won't cut it. We can't afford more distracted, divided, incompetent government. We need to get on with fixing the mess of the last 17 years and get on to delivering for the people of Scotland. So I wish, of course, the First Minister well for the future, but he needs to recognise that the public are crying out for change. I think that change can only come with an election, and I can't wait to get on with the job of delivering for the people of Scotland.
Thank you, and I call Lorna Slater.
Congratulations to John Swinney on behalf of myself and the Scottish Green Group. We recognise the right of the SNP as the largest party in this chamber to form a government, and we are content, in the spirit of stable governance, that they have managed to do so. The Scottish Greens have worked constructively with John Swinney over many years, both as partners in government and from the opposition benches, and we look forward to building a similarly constructive relationship as he takes up the role of First Minister. However, our explicit support for an SNP First Minister has always been conditional on a shared vision and policy programme, one which tackles the climate crisis head-on, which builds a fairer, more equal future, and which continues to make the case for an independent Scotland. The new First Minister has yet to lay out the vision for his new government, hence our group's abstention in the vote today. I am proud of what the Scottish Greens achieved during our time in government, lifting 100,000 children out of poverty, delivering free bus travel for young people, banning new incinerators, the most polluting single-use plastics, and putting in place emergency rent controls during the cost of living crisis. These are things which are already making people's lives better, thanks to the Scottish Greens. But there was so much work still yet to be completed. We had just introduced a housing bill which creates new rights for tenants and a permanent system of rent controls. Our Heat and Buildings programme was transforming the way we heat our homes to drive down emissions and give everyone a warm home that they can afford to heat. This has been billed as a template for the rest of the UK by the Climate Change Committee. The process to appoint Scotland's new national park was well underway, driving investment into Scotland's rural communities. The proposed Natural Environment Bill would have created new protections and legislative tools to help restore nature in Scotland, bringing a watertight ban on conversion therapy to protect some of the most vulnerable people in our society. These remain our priorities as Scottish Greens, and we will continue to advocate for the fairer, greener, more equal Scotland that they create. In the coming days and weeks, the First Minister must lay out whether his government will continue with these progressive policies, as well as the recent commitment to ramp up action on the climate emergency, or whether he will retreat to the middle ground and rely on the Tories and other pro-union parties to complete the work of government. If our parties can continue to work towards a shared vision of a fairer, progressive, independent Scotland, which takes its responsibilities to future generations seriously, our door remains open. The Scottish Greens will keep working for a better future with courage and determination, and I hope the new Scottish Government will as well.
Thank you. I now call Alice Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. On behalf of the Scottish Liberal Democrats, I'd like to offer John Swinney our sincere congratulations on his appointment as the nominee for First Minister. I also want to record our thanks, as others have done, to his family in particular for the sacrifice that this nation is now asking of them. I know that consideration weighed heavily on his mind while weighing up the decision to stand. Before I talk in more detail about what's next and the challenges that befall our new First Minister, I would like to thank Humza Yousaf for his service. I wish the outgoing First Minister, Nadia, and their family well, particularly as they await their new arrival to their family. Politics can be a bruising business. You win some, you lose some. For any elected position, you have to offer your ideas, your character and your values up for scrutiny and public debate, and that can be tough. And in those moments, you need your loved ones around you, which is why I liked that on the night of his resignation, Humza Yousaf's reaction was to go straight home and read bedtime stories to his children. Those precious moments do help provide perspective at the end of a hard day. It reminded me of the Humza Yousaf I first met 12 years ago when I was a youth worker, and I sincerely wish him well. I'm also in the market for tips with dealing with Tavish Scott. Presiding Officer, John Swinney didn't know it when he relinquished the reins of the SNP leadership 20 years ago, but his party was on the threshold of power. Today, as he picks up those reins back up again, he may not know it or choose to believe it, but I believe that the SNP now stand on the threshold of defeat. He has come full circle, but I genuinely hope, in the time that he has, that he can make a positive impact on the public services on which we all rely, that he can bring growth back to our economy, and that his government can get the basics right. I say that because I love my country and I want the very best for it, but for every day, from 2004 to 2024, he has been party to and complicit in every significant decision taken by SNP High Command or round the cabinet table of the Scottish Government. Presiding Officer, the SNP's record in government is John Swinney's record in government. And I'm not sure fair-minded people will be convinced that after 17 years of that government, it has the fresh ideas and the vision needed to move Scotland forward. Indeed, it appears to be business as usual when it comes to independence. And the circumstances under which the SNP once again wish to press this divisive agenda could not be less forgiving. I want to welcome, though, his commitment to striking a more consensual tone in a parliament that has been too divided in recent years. Now, I am confident there will be areas we can find common ground, but my party will continue to hold this government to account too, where it falls short. I would like to see, first and foremost, the new First Minister overhaul its approach to government transparency and record-keeping, because the pandemic further exposed the culture of secrecy that has existed throughout the Scottish Government. The work of the UK and Scottish COVID inquiries have been made all the harder by the deletion of evidence that Nassauer referenced. But he has the power now to change that culture. So too does he have the power to drop the ministerial takeover of social care, putting that money towards services and staff, unlocking the crisis in our health service, give councils the power surge they need to deliver locally, improve outdated standards that see sewage dumped in our rivers. A Finance Secretary for many years, I'm sure tax and spend will also be at the forefront of his mind, as we've just learned that the Scottish Government's medium-term financial strategy will be delayed. There will also be delays to the draft tax strategy and infrastructure plan. We need those long-term visions now, because taxpayers and businesses have no idea what will happen next. That's not a conducive environment for growth, and it will not give people the confidence to invest here. Presiding Officer, I conclude by saying this. He may have arrived here with some reluctance, but John Swinney is Scotland's new First Minister. I accept that and I congratulate him. He is known as a deal maker, but the enmity that now exists across this chamber will make the paralysis that gripped Scottish politics last week all the more likely. When that happens in a democracy, the best way forward is to go back to the people who sent us to this place and ask them for new instructions in the form of a Scottish parliamentary election. I appreciate that he has ruled that out, but our votes will remain available towards the dissolution of this place and that end. We will always look for consensus where we can find it on the priorities of the party and those who sent us here. For a renewed focus on net zero, for ready access to GP services at the first time of asking, and for NHS dentistry. On all those issues which have been crying out for ministerial attention, we will lay aside our differences where we can. So let me conclude by offering him the hearty congratulations of my party. Thank you.
Thank you, and I now call John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, I am very grateful to Douglas Ross, Anna Sawar, Lorna Slater and Alex Cole-Hamilton for their kind comments this afternoon, and especially their comments in relation to the support of my family. Presiding Officer, when I stood down as Deputy First Minister in March last year, I believed that would be the last senior office I would hold in politics. Having served then as a senior minister for 16 years, I felt I had, to coin a phrase, done my bit. To find myself accepting office as First Minister of Scotland today is therefore, to utter a classic understatement, something of a surprise. It is, however, an extraordinary privilege, and it is my honour to accept the office of First Minister, committing myself to do the best I can for Scotland. As I navigated my way through the media pack in the corridors of this Parliament last week, prior to announcing my candidacy for the SNP leadership, I tried to explain that I was taking my time to decide whether to stand, because I had to be certain it was a decision that was right for my family. For me, my answers to the media were not a stalling tactic or an evasive answer from an experienced politician. For me, it was the truth. Members will know that my wife Elizabeth has multiple sclerosis. She is indefatigable in trying to make sure that MS does not get in the way of her living life to the full. But much to her frustration, she does often have to rely on her husband for support and assistance. I could not just commit myself to become First Minister without being able to properly work out with my family how we would be able to manage as a family. We've talked that through, and we will manage. But I cannot let this moment pass without making clear to Elizabeth my profound eternal gratitude for the sacrifices she is prepared to make to enable her husband to serve our country as First Minister. I am so pleased that my father, my wife and children, members of my family and our dearest friends are able to be here today to see this moment. My only regret is that my beloved mother did not live long enough to see this day. As her parish minister wrote to me yesterday, your mum would have been quietly proud. My mother's love of literature and poetry, which rubbed off on her two sons, would have prompted her to find some words that would sum up this moment. Yesterday I was asked what would be the single most important policy objective for my government. I made it clear it would be the eradication of child poverty. So in searching for words to sum up this occasion, perhaps my mother would have chosen these words from one of Scotland's greatest poets, Hamish Henderson, who was born in Blairgowrie, in the very beating heart of my Perthshire North constituency. In his epic anthem, Freedom Come All Ye, which I heard Hamish Henderson sing from an open-top bus in the meadows of our great capital city during a rally that demanded the establishment of this very Parliament in the early 1990s. Hamish Henderson wrote, "So come all ye at hame with freedom, never heed what the hoodies croak for doom. In your hoose all the bairns of Adam can find breed, barley brie and painted room." If there was ever an anthem that railed against child poverty, those words from Hamish Henderson echo through the straths and streets of our diverse country as a call for us to act. So I will be unapologetic about bringing to this Parliament the measures we can take to eradicate child poverty, and I look forward to seeking the support of others to achieve that aim. Because I recognise that's how it's going to have to work. I am leading a minority government. I will need to reach out to others to make things happen, to pass legislation, to agree a budget. To pass legislation, to agree a budget. These sound like dry, technical parliamentary terms. But what they mean in reality is if we want to fund our schools and hospitals, if we want to give our businesses a competitive edge, if we want to take climate action, if we want to eradicate child poverty, if we want to change people's lives for the better, we have got to work together to do so. This Parliament, as colleagues have fairly recognised, is intensely polarised at this time. I accept my part in creating that environment, whether that is by shouted put-downs from the front bench or heckling from a sedentary position. I do promise, Presiding Officer, that that will all stop. I have changed. Perhaps time will tell on that one. This is not the collaborative place it has been in the past. A collaborative place that has done so much good to improve the lives of people in Scotland. As the Parliament marks its 25-year anniversary, and as one of the relatively small group who have been here from the start, I reflect on the major developments that have taken place by collaborative work and agreement over that time. Major developments taken forward by the Labour and Liberal executive, such as the ban on smoking in public places, or minimum unit pricing by the SNP government, or the introduction of free bus travel for under-22s by the SNP Green Partnership. I commit my government to working to create that agreement across the chamber. I hope there is space and the willingness for that to happen in the interests of the people who sent us here. Now, it is hardly a surprise to anyone in this chamber that I believe that this country could do more if we had the powers of a normal, independent nation. Others in this chamber take the opposite view. That is the essence of democracy. People free to hold and express and pursue different opinions. The question we face in this Parliament today, however, is a more practical one. Does our disagreement on the Constitution prevent us from working collaboratively within the existing powers of the Parliament to eradicate child poverty, build the economy, support jobs, address the cost of living crisis, improve the health service and tackle the climate crisis? I will give all of my energy and my willingness to engage and listen to ensure that that is not the case. I invite others to do the same. Presiding Officer, when I pitched up at Forrester High School in this city in 1979, at the age of 15 wearing my SNP badge, and my friends and teachers wondered why I had become involved in this fringe party, I could scarcely have imagined that my journey would involve becoming the First Minister of Scotland. It is an extraordinary privilege to hold this office, and I thank Parliament warmly for the honour that has been given to me. To the people of Scotland, I would say simply this: I offer myself to be the First Minister for everyone in Scotland. I am here to serve you. I will give everything I have to build the best future for our country.
Thank you. Thank you. That concludes the selection of First Minister, and it's now time to move on to the next item of business. And I'm minded to accept a motion without notice under Rule 11.2.4 of Standing Orders that decision time be brought forward to now, and I invite the Minister for Parliamentary Business to move the motion.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and happily to do so. Moved. Thank
you. And the question is that decision time be brought forward to now. Are we all agreed?